genetics. To start this unit, we're going to try and answer a fairly big question, which is, why do organisms look and act the way they do? Maybe you've never thought about it, but why do people look different? Why do we have different traits that we can see on the outside? How come we don't all look the same? Or how come there's like a million types of dogs? They're all dogs, but why do they look different? Why do they act different? And to understand this, we're going to dive into genetics, which gives us an answer to this big question. To start, it's incredibly important to know that inside each and every cell of a body, there is DNA. Consider yourself. You are made of nearly 3 trillion cells. Inside every single cell, there is DNA. And maybe you've heard of DNA, but what is it? And how does it determine your traits? Why does it make us different than somebody next to us? Before we really dive into how genetics works, it's important to have a firm understanding of the vocabulary. This is a great time to be taking notes on the important vocabulary words that we will be using throughout this unit. First up is DNA. DNA contains all of the genetic information of an organism. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that DNA contains the information to build you. DNA contains the information to build me. My DNA is slightly different than your DNA, which is why I look like me and you look like you. But it also applies to every living thing. There's DNA inside trees and fish and bugs. In order to make an organism, you need information. You need a blueprint. DNA is that information. It is the information on how to build an organism. Next up is the word chromosome. Chromosomes are large structures of DNA. And these large structures contain things called genes. Genes are just small sections of DNA, and they code for different traits. Now, for perspective, inside every single one of your cells, you have roughly 6 feet of DNA. Imagine a string 6 feet long, and on that string is information. Along that string would be tiny chunks of information. Those little chunks of DNA code for the different traits that we can see. Speaking of traits, traits are notable characteristics. It's the things we can see or observe about an organism. It might be things like eye color or hair color, height, speed, something about their metabolism. It's something notable that we can observe. Now that's important because remember, cells are too small to see, and DNA is inside of a cell. We can't see DNA. What we can see is the expression of the DNA. DNA is the information. DNA is the information to create traits, and we can see those traits. Now, last thing before we start unpacking how this works is to understand that every single cell of an organism contains DNA, but the DNA in every cell is the same. The DNA in brain cells and stomach cells and skin cells is the exact same information. To say it another way, again, inside every cell, there's a nucleus. The nucleus contains chromosomes, which is packaged up DNA. And on that DNA is the information to code things like muscle cells. Your cells can use that DNA to create stomach cells or retina cells in your eyes. It can use the information to build skin cells and brain cells. Every organism has the information on its DNA to build all the cells and all the chemicals inside that organism. So DNA is the complete set of information for an organism. To understand how this all works, I like to think about a bakery. So consider a bakery window. It has all the cakes and cookies, all the delicious treats. Those are the traits. Those are the notable characteristics of the bakery. I can see those delicious treats. But how do they get there? Well, any bakery is going to have a cookbook. It's going to have the information to make all of the cakes and cookies in that bakery. The cookbook is kind of like the DNA. It's the information to make the things. Cookbooks are organized into chapters. Maybe the first chapter is on cakes, and the 17th chapter is on cookies. The bakers at the bakery have to go to the different chapters to find information on the different treats that they're trying to bake. This is just like how your DNA is organized into chromosomes. Your DNA is chunked apart into big sections, and we call those chromosomes. Now in the bakery, the baker's gone to the chapter, and they're going to find the recipes. Maybe in the cake section, there's recipes for chocolate cake and strawberry cake. And in the section on cookies, there's chocolate chip cookie and oatmeal raisin cookies, which are gross, but that's beside the point. And the bakers use those recipes to then make the delicious treats of the bakery. The bakers use the information to create the notable characteristics. They have to follow the instructions in order to make the cakes and cookies of the bakery. Just like your cells use genes, which is information, to create the traits of you. We can also go through an example of an organism, like this beautiful Malamute. This dog has DNA in its cells. That dog's DNA is organized into chromosomes, and on those chromosomes are genes. That's all information. DNA, chromosomes, and genes is just information on how to build that dog. The information is then used to create the traits of that Malamute. There's a gene that helps that Malamute create blue eyes and pointy ears. There's genes for the fur color. There's genes for the curly tail that's important of that dog. So again, the information on the DNA, which is broken down into chunks called genes, that information is used to create the traits of the dog, the things that we can see outside. Because again, we can't see the information. We can just see what the information creates. A final thing to know is that organisms have unique DNA. Every organism is a different bakery. Every bakery has a slightly different cookbook. Now, you and I have very similar DNA. We're both humans. Our cookbooks are remarkably similar. A few recipes are different, and that's why you look like you and I look like me. But other things also have DNA. The tree outside or the bird flying outside also has DNA. They have a cookbook of information. Some of those recipes are the same as your recipes. Some of the information in a tree is the exact same information in you. But the differences in the information is what makes a tree, and you, and a bird. So let's go back to a dog example. Again, we can think about two parts of what's going on. There's the information inside of the cell of the dog, and then there's the notable characteristics of the dog that we can see. So inside this dog are cells. The cells have a nucleus. The nucleus contains chromosomes. The chromosomes are DNA. On that DNA, there's a gene for pointy ears. And there's another gene for blue eyes. The gene for pointy ears gives the dog pointy ears. The gene for blue eyes gives it the information to create blue eyes. So again, the information from inside the cell is used by the organism to create the traits that we can see or observe. Now another dog is going to have very similar DNA, but there's small changes, right? This time, the gene for ears doesn't give it pointy ears, it gives it droopy ears. And the gene for eyes gives it brown eyes instead of blue eyes. So the information inside the second dog's cells is slightly different. Because the genes are slightly different, the traits are slightly different. So to summarize, cells contain DNA. And DNA is packaged into chromosomes. Genes are the chunks of DNA that code for traits. Again, DNA is the entire library of information. Each gene is just a small section of that information, and each gene tells an organism how to create the different traits. Finally, all organisms have different DNA, which is why we all have different traits.